So in the last session, we were just going over these three additional methods for inserting a keyframe into your keyframe stack. All right? So this button here will insert a new keyframe from the main window, not the navigator. This one will insert from the main window the properties, all right, in between two keyframes. And then this last one here will interpolate or calculate between two keyframes where that animation curve would be based upon the subframe number that you select. All right, it's really as simple as that. Now let me conclude this topic by saying this. I personally don't use those buttons. I have used them. I don't use them very often, and I'll tell you why. I can get a keyframe into this stack easily enough right from the navigator, and I tend to do that. So I don't need this first insert from main. I find that it just simply has added more work. Now a use case for this first insert from main would be that I've modified lighting or formulas over here on main, and it has nothing to do with the navigator, and I say that's what I want for the keyframe, and I can push it, I can insert right from main. Me personally, typically, when I'm animating and I need keyframes, I'll be using the navigator. And as you recall from previous discussions, I personally will always make an effort to get the lighting and the coloring close. All right? So I don't need to be in a position when I'm keyframing. Most of the time I don't need to. I don't need to be in the position of modifying the formulas and the lighting, and therefore my properties are only in main, and then I need to insert a keyframe from there. Because my workflow is I take care of the fractal object as much as I can before I start keyframing, and I take care of lighting and coloring as much as I can before keyframing. Now this insert between two keyframes. Now I don't use that very much at all, and the reason for that is because I'm not normally thinking about inserting in between existing keyframes, because I go along and I think about what's my next move, and then I make the move. So I mean, you can tell from my my documentation, okay, I am thinking about my move, and I make the move, and I implement it up there. Of course, I document it, and I have a series of moves. So for me, my keyframes are invented as I go, kind of in a serial manner, and I don't find myself in a position where I kind of revert back and say, oh, I need to put a keyframe in there, because I've already determined my move, my animation. So I don't normally insert a keyframe between two keyframes. I don't normally do that. Now from time to time on this interpolate between two keyframes, I have used that. Usually what happens is that I have made a long step count. Let's say up here I put 2,000 keyframes in, okay? Subframes, I'm sorry, subframe. I put 2,000 subframes, so there's going to be 2,000 subframes between two keyframes. And that's what I want. I want that kind of number of subframes between the two. I might be doing a very fast move, a very quick, fast move, very fast through the scene. I might do that. But what I found, little secret for you, and I haven't really been able to verify it by looking at the Mandelbulb 3D code, but I have kind of verified it by practical experience. I have found that the Mandelbulb 3D simply does not like a very high count of the subframes between keyframes. For some reason, it just, I don't know what it is. It just runs out of a loop, runs out of memory. I don't know what's going on, but that's failed me. So what I'll do is, if I have 2,000 subframes between two keyframes, I might interpolate one right in the middle, and so now I have 1,000, and then 1,000. And I basically have used the interpolation between keyframes, that last, this third button here, to basically tell Mandelbulb, look, it's okay if you have more than, if you don't have a huge expanse of subframe count. And I can do that. I mean, I could take two keyframes and I could interpolate in between, right, exactly. Two keyframes, 2,000 subframes, interpolate to 1,000, interpolate again, 500, interpolate again if I wanted to. So I personally have used the interpolate between keyframes as a way to be able to get a long distance in terms of subframes between two keyframes, and staying within, what shall we say, the tolerance level of the Mandelbulb software. All right, but normally what I do is I will, let me put that back, yeah, 50, okay. Normally what I'll do is I will do my keyframes as I go along, and I find that I rarely need to actually insert between two keyframes or interpolate between two keyframes, with the exception of the use case I just explained, which isn't very often. And I find that I don't normally insert because it limits me to inserting from main. All right? So there you have a pretty good idea what these three buttons do. And now, with that said, I can say that I don't use them that often. Well, but they're there if the occasion arises, and they will arise. It's like everything I've said before. When you know the capabilities of your tools, in this case a software tool, to generate Mandelbulb 3D fractals, when you know your software, you're able to do more with it, because you'll come up on a scenario and you say, well, how am I going to handle that? And you say, okay, well, I've got these three buttons here. Let me see what I can do with that. The better you know your tools, the more you're going to be able to get out of your software, the less frustrating it will be for you, the more creative you can be, and in this case, the longer your animations can be, because you know your tools well enough and you know the workflow well enough where you don't find yourself stuck trying to figure out what to do, and you understand concepts of quick recovery, and concepts of documenting your steps as you go so you don't get lost, and you will get lost without documenting. And you understand the little quirks and idiosyncrasies of your software. Okay, anyway, so that's enough on these insertion methods. All right, and I think what we could do is let's end this session, and when we get back, we're going to do some more keyframing on our project. I think it's about time that we move our project forward and do some additional keyframing. Okay? So I'll see you in the next session. We'll do some keyframing. I'll see you there.